So JavaScript has a new internationalization API. Now that sounds very fancy, but all it does is to allow us to easily format numbers and strings according to different languages. So with this new API, we can make our application support different languages for users around the world, which is pretty important. For example, currencies or dates are represented in a completely different way in Europe or in the US or in Asia, for example. Now, there is a lot of language-specific things that we can do with the Internationalization API. But in this section, we're just briefly going to talk about formatting dates and numbers. And starting with dates in this video. So in our application, we have dates in two places. First right here, and then second here in each of these movements. Now, in case you're wondering why these labels like today or yesterday or 5 days ago are gone here from my application, it's just because I'm recording this video a couple of days later. All right. But anyway, let's go to the place in our code which displays this first date here, so that we can format that according to different languages and see what it looks like. And so that is right here in the login handler function. And in particular, this is the code that we have currently. Remember doing this? But now we will actually be able to get rid of all of this and simply replace it with the Internationalization API. So it will do this kind of formatting for us automatically. But for now, let's actually display this date here outside of the login so that we can experiment a little bit with this API without having to log in all the time. So I will grab the current date, experimenting with the API. Okay. And then we also need to get just this part where we do then actually display something in the DOM, right? So we want to set this text content property here to something. And we want to set it to a formatted date. And so let's now use the Internationalization API for that. So that's new, and then Intl, and so that's basically the namespace for the Internationalization API. And then for times and dates, we use the .date time format function. Okay. Now all that we need to pass into this function here is a so-called local string, and this local is usually the language and then dash the country. So something like this. So English and then dash US, for example. All right. And so all of this here will create a so-called formatter for this language in this country. So English.us. And I will show you a list of many different locales here in a second. But for now, let's get started with this one. So all of this creates a new formatter, and then on that formatter, we can call .format. All right. And then here we actually pass in the date that we want to format. So that's now. And that's actually it. So let's reload here. And you see that now the date is actually formatted just like it is usually formatted in the US, with the month first and then the day. Now English is also spoken in other languages. So let's try the UK now, or Great Britain. So for the UK, we have to use this one. And now you see that it is different. So you have the day first, then the month, and it also has this leading 0 here. And so you see that now it is actually formatting this date for this exact locale that we specified here. And so just with this one line of code, we have correctly formatted the date for any user around the world. And let's try some other countries here as well. For example, we could try Arabic for Syria. So that would look like this. So in these symbols that I cannot really understand. But what matters is that it is indeed formatted correctly. Let's just put it back here. All right. And to get these different codes, let's just Google ISO language code table. And then the one that's easiest to understand is this one here. So go to the one that has lingos.net. And then from there, you can find your own code and then experiment with that and see if it's also correct. All right. Now, this is the most straightforward way of formatting dates and times, but we can actually take it to the next level and add some options to also customize this a little bit. For example, you see that right now, it only displays the date here, but not any time, right? And so we can change that by providing an options object to this function here. So let's define that options object outside here. And I'm simply calling it options. And so all we have to do is to specify the hours property or hour and set it to numeric. And the same for the minute, set it to numeric as well. And now we have to then provide this object here as a second argument into the date time format function. So options. And of course, we could have written this object right here, but I will add some more stuff to it in a second. And then this line of code here becomes a little bit messy. So it's quite usual to have a configuration object like this one here defined outside. So, as you see, now we get indeed the time. But on the other hand, now the date is gone. So let's get that back as well. And here we can specify properties for each of weekday, year, month, and day. So let's start with the day, and I will set it to numeric as well. So let's see what happens then. And so now we only get the day. Let's add the month as well. Numeric again. And so now we get the month here as 8. Okay, and that's because we specified it as numeric. But for month, we can also write long. So let's see what happens then. And so now we get August, and so not just the number. And for the month, there is even another option, which is 2-digit. And so then it would be 08. But let's leave it at long. And now the year as well. Let's set it to numeric. And of course in quotes. All right. So that's 2020. But we could also say just 2-digit. And so then it would be 20. But again, let's leave it as numeric. And finally, we can even specify the weekday. And here I'm using long again. And so then it will write out the day completely. So Wednesday, August 12, 2020. And all of this nicely formatted, just like people in the US do it. All right. Now here we can also say short or narrow, and you can experiment with that. So let's see what it would look like in the UK. So that's pretty similar. But now let's see, for example, Portugal. So PT-PT. And so now you will see this here, of course, written all in Portuguese. And the same, of course, for other locales, so for other languages. Now, in many situations, it actually makes more sense to not define the locale manually, but instead to simply get it from the user's browser. And so that's pretty easy to do as well. So let's define another variable here outside. So locale, and then that simply navigator dot language. So let's log it here to the console first. So you see that mine here is set to English, Great Britain. And so if I replace this here now, then you will see that it will go back here to displaying it in English. All right. And so if you do this yourself now, then your date should be displayed to whatever language you have in your browser. Anyway, let's now take this and actually put it here into our login. So replacing all of this, I will just comment it out to leave it here. And now we have a duplicate here. Let's get rid of that. So now the date will only get formatted when the user actually logs in. All right. But now let's take a look at our account objects here. And so you see that now in each of the accounts, I defined a locale, right? So account 1 is Portuguese and the other one is in English. And so let's now actually use these locales to display Jonas's date here in the Portuguese format and Jessica's date in the American format. Okay, so that's easy enough. We just have to find the correct place in our code. So yeah, that's right here. And remember that we have the account in the current account variable. And so here, instead of using this locale that's coming from the browser, so instead of using this, we use current account.locale. So let's give it a save. And now I will log in as Jonas. And remember that should now display in the Portuguese format. And indeed, it does. Now the problem here is that our entire user interface is in English, but now I have this weekday here in Portuguese and also this month name. So to fix that, let's actually set the month here back to numeric and also get entirely rid of the weekday. So let's try that again. So we got rid of the Portuguese words here, but the formatting still follows the official Portuguese way. Now let's check out Jessica Davis. And so you see it looks different now. It is now in the American format with the month first and then also with the AM time down here. And of course you can set one of these accounts to your own language to see how it would look like in your language to make it a little bit more personalized for yourself. Great. So with this we have localized this date here. Now we need to do the same with the dates down here in the movements. So let's go to that function which formats these dates. Remember we created a function for that up here. So that is format movement date. Okay. Again, let's now do this formatting here also for these movements. And so what we're going to do is to replace all of this here with a new nicely formatted date. So instead of returning all of this here like we did before, we will simply return new and then again the intl namespace date time format, and then here we need the locale, and so let's actually pass that into the function. All right, so this function right now only receives a date, but we also now need a locale. So let's add that here as a second parameter. And now wherever we call this function, and that is down here, so here we now need to pass in that locale, of course. And so that comes from the account.locale. So the current account in here is called ACC, remember? And so that locale is at acc.locale. All right. So return new date format and then simply the locale that we receive here. and then format the date. And so that's again the date that we receive as an input here. Okay, and that's it. And in this case, we don't want any options object because here we don't need the hours or the minutes. All we want is to simply display the date as simple as possible. And in that case, we don't even need any options. So let's give it a save here. Try it now with Jessica Davis. And you see that indeed, now it is the American format with the month first like this. Let's just transfer some money here to Jonas. And so of course here our today still works. So these kind of easier to read and understand labels that I showed you earlier. So that is the American format. And now let's again see Jonas' format, which should now change to the Portuguese one. And indeed, it did. And so this part is now working as well. Great. So in a nutshell, this is how we localize dates in JavaScript using the new internationalization API. And as always, feel free to read the documentation on MDN. So that's just MDN Intl. And so here you're going to find all kinds of different functions. So I mentioned in the beginning that there's all kinds of stuff we can do with this API. So besides dates, so we can also format lists or like words, and there are plurals. All right. But if you want to learn about this one a little bit better that we just used, you can go ahead and read the documentation right here. In the next video, we will use this number format function here to format all the remaining numbers that we have in our application. So let's move on and do that now.